Hi, welcome back. I stuck these cottonwoods here because then I could tell where to stand. So I'm going to move them over, and hopefully this background is working. I was going to go outside today, and I fiddled around with all that, but it's a little windy out on the porch, and the microphone was going. And so I'm going to have to wait till a warmer day that is calmer. And I'm also hoping that the sound is better. I've been fiddling with that too, thanks to my friend Kip on the phone. I'm learning a lot about making videos and movies and things, and I hope it's getting better. And I apologize if you can't hear me as well as you'd like to, but thank you for wanting to. And thank you too for sending me notes. I think this is nice to be alone and together. And I think, I was talking to some friends today on Zoom, just a little like Hollywood Squares, don't you think? Anyway, we were on Zoom, and everybody's feeling a little alone. We're kind of settling in. Our Zoom coffee clutch, we thought it might last 1 week, maybe 2. We even thought we should have them more often than just 1 day a week. And this is the 4th one that we've been sheltering in place and literally talking with friends who live right here in Haines. So I think the nice thing about right now is that we're all, I guess I should only speak for myself, but a little more vulnerable than we usually are, or maybe not, but maybe we're admitting it. At any rate, this is chapter 6 of Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, and it's called All Good Gifts Around Us, and the epigraph in the front says, "For an abundance of the fruits of the earth, let us pray to the Lord." And it's from the Book of Common Prayer. And again, remember, this is about 15 years ago is when a lot of the stories in this book took place. So it's a place in time. So I'm going to be talking about some of my children here, and now they're grown up. They're grown-ups. That's one thing about all of this pandemic is I've been rethinking a little bit how much I encourage them to go to college and live in their own houses. Now I kind of wish that they were still all on the couch, or that all their children and everybody had moved in. So who knows? I'm sure that... Anyway, chapter 6, All Good Gifts Around Us. My daughter Eliza is a committed jammer. When berries are in season, she picks them and makes jam. One summer morning, she nudged me to drop my other responsibilities and join her. What column? And wasn't I supposed to be writing a book? Those could wait until winter, she assured me. Then, like the rest of my family often does, she suggested that I don't really work anyway. I'm just playing with words, as James Michener said, because I like the swing of them as they tangle with human emotions. She also suspected I wasn't writing at all, but emailing or reading the Juneau Empire, the Anchorage Daily News, and the New York Times online, which was half true. Then she reminded me that I can't really be a writer since I can't type. I use only 2 fingers. Come on, let's start jamming, Eliza coaxed as she hummed Bob Marley's reggae tune, Bob Marley's reggae tune. Jamming, we're jamming, we're jamming, we're jamming. Anyway, Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote that a mother at her desk is always interruptible for any reason at all, while a father in the same chair gets tiptoed around. Even though that was back before Betty Friedan, it's still true at our house. Although when you get right down to it, I want to be interrupted. I love the distractions as much as I love the writing, and I'm certain I wouldn't have one without the other. I lost a whole summer of gardening and gathering the year I was run over, and I missed it terribly. I didn't want to see Paris in the springtime. I wanted to plant my garden. I didn't want to go out to dinner. I wanted to grill salmon on a campfire down on the beach in my backyard. Then the only thing I could still do was write, and it wasn't enough. I grew tired of my own company. There's that, and even though my column deadline was technically that afternoon, I knew I could email it first thing in the morning, which was what I do anyway, whether I sat at my desk or went berry picking. Alistair Cook produced his terrific and highly lauded Letter from America weekly radio column in a thoroughly organized, completely controlled way. As soon as he recorded one, he began writing the next, and he wrote and revised it for a few hours each day until it was due, and then he'd start all over again. He kept this up for 58 years. I would like to tell you that this is how I write my weekly column for the Anchorage Daily News, which runs on Thursdays and is due on Mondays, sort of, and which I have maintained for a little over 10 years. Again, I don't write that column anymore, but I wish I did, but everything is different now, so I'm talking to you instead. But this is how I really do it. I try not to think about it for 4 or 5 days, and then all day Monday, I plan to have something written down. Words, ideas, a list, anything by dinner time, which for some reason on deadline often includes unexpected company. Before the dishes are washed, which my husband does, since by then I have started to panic, I'm back at my desk. It's now about 9, and the column was due at 5. This is not as terrible as it sounds. A few years ago, I discovered that the editors at the Daily News didn't read what I sent them until the next morning, which gave me a whole extra night to fret. So after dinner on Monday, I sit down and write a story or an outline or even like a letter I'll never mail to a friend about what's going on in Haines at our house or what I think about it and maybe a bit of insight into what it means. It is usually awful and too long, and if I died writing it and anyone ever found it, they would think my columns must have been ghostwritten. Last year, I learned that no one at the paper really reads my column until closer to noon the day after it's due. So now I wake up at 4 a.m. Tuesdays, often delete everything I wrote the night before, and start again, simultaneously convinced that 1, I will lose my job, and 2, be the laughingstock of the world when this gibberish is actually printed with my name on it in the paper, and that what I have to communicate and the way I do it will win a Pulitzer Prize and no doubt earn me a MacArthur Genius Grant. Writing a column makes me completely bipolar. On those deadline mornings, even though my desk is on the wide corner of the stair landing between the first and second floors, it's right up here, so I'm kind of right in the middle of things. And even though all of my children and my husband have to walk by me to eat breakfast, I don't greet them. Sometimes I don't even hear them leave for work and school. I prefer to think that I'm as focused as a downhill ski racer in the zone. Chip has a different view. He points to me, typing away on 2 fingers, in my pajamas with coffee cups and a week's worth of notes on my desk, where the candle of Nuestra Señora del Perpetuo Socorro, sorry, I'm really terrible at Spanish, but what it means in English is Our Lady of Perpetual Help, is not burning, since I never light candles except at dinner, because I might forget to blow one out and burn the house down. Chip points at me and says, "Kids, take a good look. This is your mother on crack." But I don't care, because as much as I love my family and my children and this busy life, I need something more, something that is my own. I started writing because I could do it at home and because I heard good stories every day, and when I'd share one with a friend or my family, they would listen. And when I shared some idea I had or some thought about what this life may mean, they'd nod in agreement or laugh. That's why I write. Without my family and all the activity that swirls around us in this small Alaskan community, I might not have anything to say. That's what makes these quiet times a little harder, doesn't it? That's why I'm reading to you right now, because I'm not sure what I can really say when I'm just in my head, you know? Anyway, after all, I don't write about space aliens, African detectives, or cowboys. When I read that E.B. White said that he preferred working at home to an office because he did his best thinking to the ebb and flow of the living room tide, I knew exactly what he meant. I was always aware that without my family life, I would have no so-called career. But my daughter JJ was the one who reinforced that one winter when she was in junior high, at the age when one day you were 12 going on 30, and the next day you were 12 going on 6. We had just returned from a trip back east. The airport screening had frightened her. There had been another school shooting in the news, and she was worried that it could happen in Haines. Normally steady, JJ had tears in her eyes when she said she didn't want to go to school. She was scared. That was a Monday, too. A work day. It was cold and clear, and the ice on the pond was perfect. So she skipped school, and I skipped writing, and we walked up the snowy trail through the woods. And yes, they really were lovely, dark, and deep. I bet Robert Frost discovered that on a walk in the forest when he was on a deadline, too. That's one benefit of deadlines. They imbue everything with new and very deep meaning. They make you pay attention. In that way, it's a spiritual practice. Our vicar, Jan Hotsey, tells us that God is all around us. The problem is we don't see him or her because we're not looking. It's like that old joke, the one about a guy who was pulled out to sea by a bad undertow and prays for God to come and rescue him, and a kayaker paddles by and asks if he needs a hand. No, he says, the Lord is coming. A water ski boat comes by, slows down, and asks if he's okay. Fine, he says, I'm just waiting on the Lord. Finally, a helicopter with a Coast Guard rescue swimmer on board hovers over him, and still he rejects the assistance, waving them off. So he drifts out into the ocean. It's getting dark, and he prays like Jesus did, "Oh, Lord, why have you forsaken me?" The clouds part, and God hollers down, "I sent a kayak, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more can I do?" I like to think that deadlines inspire writing the way crises inspire prayer, but I hope that I'll recognize divine assistance when or if I see it. The column that came out of the day JJ and I skated all by ourselves until the low January sun went behind the mountains was that kind of gift. We two glided on a glassy pond deep in the woods, pretending we were ice dancers, singing my favorite things in alternating lines. She'd holler, "When the bee stings," and I'd shout, "When the dog bites," and then in unison we'd speed over the ice, belting out, "And then I don't feel so bad." JJ has an unaffected, clear soprano voice. She sings the national anthem at home basketball games. I can read music and carry an alto tune in the chorus. As for solos, let's just say that what I lack in talent, I make up for with enthusiasm. A remote pond is the best place for me to sing. This is something, too, about these times. I got a note that was forwarded, you know, those things that we're all getting now from some doctor somewhere to tell us to gargle with salt water and put the humidifier, you know, on, or a pot of water on the stove. But this one had one that I kind of grabbed onto. It said one of the things that will help us right now is singing, because the act of singing and breathing calms the vagal nerve, and that's what makes you anxious and upset. And maybe that's why I sing a lot, because I'm anxious a lot. But I thought I'd pass that on to you. It's okay to sing loudly right now, even if you can't really carry a tune. Besides, no one's going to hear you. Anyway, a remote pond is the best place for me to sing. By the time we hiked back down the trail, our bodies were tired and our hearts were light. We had done a few of our favorite things. JJ really didn't feel so bad, and I had something sweet and timely to write about. I hummed a little bit of my favorite things later that summer morning and looked at my devotional candle encased in a tall glass. On the front is a decal of the Virgin Mary. On the back, a prayer in Spanish and in English that reads in part, Mother of good counsel, you come to my aid and my urgent needs, and be my guide in all things. Blessed symbol of heart and home, may your love and charity for all God's children look favorable upon me. If you read it with a Spanish accent, it sounds perfect. The translation, I know, is a little bumpy. When I asked Mary, as the mother of us all, to treat me well, I know that as the mother of only 5, I should be able to at least watch over my own home. Summer days slip away faster than they used to. I appreciate them more because I came so close to not having any more summers at all. At an Episcopal burial service, Psalm 90 is usually read to remind mourners that our lives are as temporary as a summer field. In the morning it is green and groweth up, but in the evening it is cut down. My oldest daughter, Eliza, is done with college. The second is engaged. My son is in college, and the 2 younger girls are flying through high school. Sooner than I want, I'll have lots of time to write, and not nearly as much to write about. In the meantime, Eliza was still standing behind me, humming jammin', and when I closed my laptop, she said happily, "I knew you'd come." Last year, Eliza picked gallons of blueberries for her jam. This year, the blueberries are slow or late or hiding. It's been a funny fruit year that way. My 2 sweet cherry trees did not produce 1 cherry. The yellow transparent apple tree has 3 apples on it, but the little dwarf Rome apple tree, an experiment in this climate, is so loaded with fruit its branches are sagging. The garden strawberry plants were covered with berries and were eaten straight from the yard or on breakfast cereal. There were no leftovers for jam or the freezer. The wild strawberries nearby are off limits because my neighbor Linus has staked the patch as hers, although this year she couldn't do anything about the bear that raked them clean. But the raspberries are another story. The abundant wild beach berries are small and sweet, the cultivated berries big and juicy. In lots of yards and alleys around town, they have grown all mixed up with each other, making for a hybrid of half-wild urban-style berry, or at least as urban as the small town gets. They grow by the sidewalks, along side streets, in vacant lots, and next to old sheds. The way Eliza and I look for them is to cruise slowly on our bikes, watching for telltale red dots in the bushes. I was carefully riding a purposely clunky, heavy, English-style town cruiser. I had not yet braved a real ride on a racing bicycle. My accident taught me 2 critical and literal lessons about bicycles and automobiles. The first is that when you're cycling on a road with cars, pretend you're invisible. Assume the drivers cannot see you. The second is that if you, God forbid, are headed for a collision with the vehicle, don't try to avoid it and fall off your bike and skid under it, as I did. Run into it. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but you're supposed to hit it and dive over the top. That way you may break an arm and a few ribs, but you probably won't die or almost die. And of course, you should always wear a helmet. I had one on for the easy berry picking ride even, as we pedaled and coasted, looking for the distinctive raspberry bush canes and leaves and those spots of red. We carried empty quart yogurt containers with strings attached to them around our necks, allowing us to pick with 2 hands. We had gallon freezer bags to dump the berries into when our cups were full. 3 yogurt containers equal 1 bag. A full bag equals 1 batch of jam, about 8 jars, plus a bowl of fresh berries for eating. When you pedal a bicycle slowly, you see, hear, and smell things you might normally miss. I feel more awake, more aware somehow than I do at my desk, or even when I'm running errands in the car. When E.B. White was deep into the work of writing in the front room of his farm in Maine, his favorite break was to head down the road on his old Raleigh 3-speed because he said it helped remove the cobwebs. I bet he edited those webs while he pedaled along, and that during his daily ride, he was able to see more in them than you or I would. He was, after all, some writer. Searching for ripe raspberries is as much fun as finding them. There's a field across from the harbor, adjacent to the Presbyterian church, filled with big, fat raspberry-bearing bushes. Some had been planted there when the clearing held a large garden and a small herd of dairy cows 100 years ago, back when the missionaries also ran an orphanage and a school on the same site. As soon as it became apparent that this was a magical year for the old raspberry bushes, we hardcore berry gatherers tried to keep the news of the bumper crop quiet. In part, forgive me, Lady of Perpetual Help, so there would be more for ourselves. The other concern was that we weren't sure if it was okay to pick them. It might be stealing. That's the only problem with harvesting berries in town. The ground they grow on usually belongs to someone. These berries were technically the Presbyterians. My friend Lisa solved this moral dilemma by inviting a Presbyterian Sunday school teacher to come pick with her. She also reasoned that if they are church berries, then they are God's berries and therefore all mankind's, which means us too, right? What's more, she added, there are so many we can't pick them all anyway, and no one wants them to go to waste, especially a Presbyterian. My plan was to pick as much as I needed without asking permission and then bring Pastor Ron Horn and his wife a jar of jam to thank them. This is an old Alaskan tradition when it comes to our always contentious land use issues. It's known as act now, ask later. While we picked, hidden behind bushes taller than we were or crouched down among the shorter stalks, we heard the sounds of the summertime town, the drone of the harbor ice machine, the boats tying up at the fuel dock, the fishermen laughing and occasionally swearing loudly. We eavesdropped on conversations taking place down on the gentle bank along the sidewalk. A few tourists off a cruise ship took the path that skirts the field from the harbor to the visitor center and stopped to ask what we were doing. When we told them, they asked how we knew the berries were edible. They were suspicious of berries that came right off bushes, of wild fruit that hadn't been washed or wrapped in cellophane at the store. When Ron opened his church office window to catch the breeze, I was afraid he might ask what we were doing as well, but he waved, which we took as a blessing. The smell of garlic from the lunch special at the nearby Lighthouse restaurant signaled that it was time to leave. We'd been picking all morning, and there was still a lot of boiling, sterilizing, and cooking to do before we had jam. Once all the jars were hauled up from the cellar, checked for cracks, and washed, and the new lids were sterilized, once everything was laid out, from measuring cups to funnels, and once the large, speckled black and white enamel kettle was filled with water and the flame turned up high underneath it, Eliza and I crushed the berries in a cast iron pot, added pectin and sugar, and let it all roll to a boil. Then we quickly and carefully poured that gorgeous, rich red seedy goop into hot, clean jars, screwed the two-part lids on them, lowered each one into a kettle of boiling water for 10 minutes, and finally, gingerly but firmly, fished them out with the rubber-edged tongs designed for this purpose and set them on dish towels on the counter. This is when I pray that the jars will seal so that they'll keep safely all winter in the pantry and we can taste sunshine on a snowy day. Sweat trickled under our shirts as Eliza and I arranged those half pints of what seemed to be some kind of miracle in rows to cool down. When we had finished one batch, there were 4 more to go, I stepped out the back door to cool off. Through the open door, I could hear the reassuring pop of lids sealing and Eliza washing the sticky pots and more jars and mixing up more berries and sugar, singing as surely as if she were the backup band member for Bob Marley and the Wailers. The next morning, as I do every Tuesday, I sat down with my unlit candle and a strong cup of coffee with cream and wrote a column about making jam and picking berries and my daughter and some thoughts on the whys and what-fors of motherhood, too. I ate toast with the new jam on it, knowing that nothing I do at my desk could compete with homemade raspberry jam. A few weeks later, I was confident that I would be prepared for the next column and had cleared my week to write a good one at a reasonable pace when I was sidetracked again. This time, I had to move my laptop to the kitchen in order to keep an eye on 2 big polished aluminum pressure canners loaded with 48 half-pint jars of smoked salmon, while they hissed and rattled on the stove like something from Frankenstein's laboratory. I watched them closely to be sure the pressure gauge didn't dip below 11 pounds, because then I'd have to start all over again, and it had taken the better part of 3 days to get that far. Well, truthfully, I didn't go that far, just up the river for the fish and across the garden to my smokehouse. For the next 2 hours, I couldn't travel farther than 5 feet from the canner gauges because I couldn't leave the room. The kitchen was cleaner than it had been in weeks. I'd also already written a short obituary for the Chilkat Valley News in memory of a nice 93-year-old woman who had lived here for 10 years, some 35 years ago, and who no one could remember at all. I even called Clyde over at the seafood store because he knew all the old-timers. She was real nice, he said, but couldn't recollect anything specific. Tom would not let me use "she was real nice" in an obituary unless I can prove it. Although everyone else I called repeated the sentiment. That was all they could summon. This may be proof that being nice is not always the best policy. To make a lasting impression, sometimes you have to do more than that. The final call I had made was to the woman's elderly neighbor, who once more confirmed that our gal was nice, but also could not think of one particular charitable act to illustrate it. So we talked instead about her own granddaughter, who was swimming in the Olympic trials that week. Their own 20-mile swim up the river is why the salmon in my canners will taste different, some say, better and less oily than the salmon Chip and I have caught in salt water. These fish come from a friend's net set in the river up in Klukwan. The Chilkat River hosts all 5 species of Pacific salmon, which is rare. We were after sockeye, whose dark red meat is the best for smoking. I happen to think it's the best for eating too, but there were a few king salmon still making their way upstream, so we were careful to let them go in order to allow them to spawn for future fishing seasons. It was cool and breezy and threatening rain as we cleaned our catch on a weathered wood workbench with burlap tacked to it. The top sloped slightly toward the river, sluicing all the waste toward the water. The gut slid off the edge with a splash into the swift-moving current to feed more fish and fertilize the soil for more berries. The river here is so full of glacial silt that it could be milky green paint. My future son-in-law, a fisheries biologist, has done studies that confirm that the Chilkat River salmon know their way back to their natal spawning grounds by smell. The water has a kind of aroma. At least it does if you are a fish. To me, it smells like summer, and in addition to going a whole one without gathering berries after my accident, I had also really missed canning salmon. I wasn't going to lose any opportunity. This domestic therapy was as important to my recovery as physical therapy, which is why the whole house smelled of smoke and salmon and the shot of vinegar in each canner that keeps the jars sparkling. It's a smell of harvest time and of a kind of love. That brings me full circle as well to the ebb and flow of the tide in my kitchen. I was listening to those canners rattle, thinking about Presbyterian berries. I have read recently that scientists now believe that the Milky Way has an odor too, and it contains a chemical that gives raspberries their flavor. And also of something else E.B. White wrote about life on his farm, the one that gave him eggs and butter and the inspiration for Charlotte's Web. He advised that when you enter a barn, remove your hat. The same could be said for a berry patch or smokehouse. And even though Thanksgiving was months away, I heard the old hymn, "We thank thee then, O Father, for all things bright and good, the seed time and the..." I'm way off on that tune, aren't I? The seed time and the harvest are all things, the seed time and the harvest are life. Well, you know the tune, but all good gifts around us are sent from heaven above. That's where we go. Then thank the Lord, oh thank the Lord for all his love. I told you singing is good, even if you're not always good at it. It's the thought that counts. And more importantly, it's the breath that counts. And I think that's really important right now. Just take a few deep breaths. And this story was just perfect for today because I decided after yesterday, where I was a little anxious with all the news, that today I was going to spend the afternoon in the greenhouse, and I've got some seeds, and I'm going to clean it all up and get ready. And maybe I'll be able to do one of these out there because obviously the wind can't blow inside of there. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you have a good weekend. And if you celebrate Easter, that you have a happy Easter, and that wherever you are, maybe you have an opportunity to make something nice, like jam or even hard-boiled eggs. You'll feel better. Okay? Thanks very much. Now I'm going to do this little turn-off thing, and have a good day.